God and I are one. Meher Baba. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Thanks to beloved Baba and Jai Baba to all of you. We are reading God Speaks to please beloved Baba because he has mentioned several times that he would want all his lovers to read and go through God Speaks at least once in their lifetime. So our project is to read God Speaks and make Baba pleased. This is the 7th session of God Speaks. We are on page number 19, 19. And for those who have come in new, a very, very tiny synopsis of what we have done so far, very tiny. God Speaks is, one may say, a kind of a biography of a soul apparently separated from the ocean, apparently separated from the oversoul. The story of a drop as compared to the ocean, a story of an Atma as compared to Paramatma, how a drop soul apparently separated from the ocean at the time of creation goes through the process of evolution. And when we say evolution, Baba categorically said that it is evolution of consciousness. And evolution of consciousness precedes evolution of forms. In other words, evolution of forms is a byproduct of the factory of the evolution of consciousness. Evolution starts from the very initial stage of creation, gases, stones, metal, minerals, vegetables, worms, fish, bird, animal, and human beings. The moment first human being, the evolution converts into a human being, the process of evolution is now whole and complete. There is no further evolution of consciousness. In other words, the dream of consciousness fructifies in the very first human form. After the human form, the process is called reincarnation. Birth and death, birth and death, birth and death. Death, by death, I don't mean the real death, the death of the form, the death of the medium, the death of the bubble, and not the soul itself. That is called evolution. That is called reincarnation. After reincarnation, we have what is known as involution, which is the path to the God realization. It is the inner path, involution, where it has got 6 planes of consciousness in duality, and the 7th plane is the reality. From the 6 to the 7, you go from the dream state to the awake state, the darkness to light, the ignorance to knowledge, the Dvaita to oneness. So that is the final journey where you jump from the 6 to the 7 and the process is over. So first we have creation, evolution, reincarnation, involution, realization. That's the whole story of a drop soul apparently separated and then merging in the ocean and experiencing itself not as a part of the ocean, but as the ocean, simply because the ocean is not only, when we say ocean, we don't mean the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian. The ocean means the infinite, unlimited ocean of God. When the bubble bursts, finally, the bubble of ignorance, the bubble of mind, the bubble of illusion, the bubble of form, or the bubble of medium which the soul has used in order to gain that consciousness, when that bubble bursts, the drop becomes one with the ocean and experiences itself not as a part of the ocean, but as the ocean. Aham Brahmasmi, Analhak, Soham, I am God. God realization, self-realization, for the simple reason that the drop was never ever separated from the ocean. It was only a Brahm or a Bhas or you can say an illusion. an experience of separateness which was apparent because of the existence of a mind. So then this is basics I'm just giving. So this is the whole love story of how we became one. As Baba says, it is never that we are never separated. God realization is nothing but the experiential knowledge that I am God. Intrinsically, we are all God. I wouldn't even say we are God in process or God in the making. We are God. But the only thing is, apart from being God, we have a whole lot of clutter, kachra, garbage, sanskaras, impressions, which need to be weeded out. So we've done up till now, we have already become gases for those who were here in the earlier class. Then we became stone, metal, mineral, we became that. Then after that we became vegetable. But Baba says that in the stone, metal, mineral, there's a recumbent position like this, lying down. In the plant or in the vegetable, we have an upright position. But that needs support of earth and all that. And then we stopped at the plant, and now we are starting to enjoy the freedom and liberty of a worm. So now today we are going to become worm, and let us see what Baba has to say about worms. If you have any questions in between, please feel free to ask. But as I had said in my very first session, ask only as much as we have read so far. Don't ask something which is beyond what we have already done. So because many people have already read God Speaks several times. Yes, Chitranjan Sahab. Nothing is, when you are asking, is it possible, Baba was asked something very something which out of the way, and Baba said, nothing is impossible in illusion. So everything is possible. अच्छा मैं प्रयास करूँगा हिंदी में कुछ कुछ बताने के लिए ये जो गॉड स्पीक्स जो किताब है वो सबसे उत्तम, जैसे हम लोग उसको बोलते हैं मैग्नम ओपस ऑफ मेहर बाबा's फिलॉसफी. इट इज़ द बुक, यू सी. तो उनके अंदर बाबा बताते हैं, एक एग्जाम्पल देते हैं कि ईश्वर जो है वो एक समुंदर के माफिक है, समंदर, प्लीज करेक्ट मी, समंदर के समान है. समंदर में हम देखते हैं कि भाई शोर है, बॉटम है, टॉप है, लेकिन ये जो समंदर है वो अनलिमिटेड, लिमिटलेस, जिसकी कोई लिमिट नहीं है. फ्रॉम असीम, यस, फ्रॉम द बिगिनलेस बिगिनिंग टू द एंडलेस एंड इटर्नल है. कोई भी ऐसा समय नहीं था कि जहाँ समंदर नहीं था, यानी परमात्मा नहीं था, और कोई भी ऐसा समय नहीं होगा जहाँ परमात्मा नहीं रहेगा, जिसको हम बोलते हैं इटर्नल. और अनलिमिटेड है, असीमित है, शाश्वत है. अब ये समंदर में एक किस्म की हुक्की हुई, बाबा यूजेस द वर्ड विम, हुक्की, विम, लहर. ये क्यों हुई, कैसे हुई, कब हुई, तब क्यों नहीं हुई, अब क्यों हुई, उसका कोई उत्तर नहीं है. देयर इज नो आंसर टू हाउ दिस अर्ज became manifest. Because if we have a rationale towards how this urge came about, then that is not a urge. आप बोलेंगे क्या हिंदी में? So, अगर हमारे पास कोई ऐसे रैशनल है, यानी हम दिमाग लगा के कह सकते हैं कि भाई ये अर्ज, यानी हुक्की बोलते हैं ना, ऐसे ही अनायास बोलते हैं ना, अनायास कुछ हो गई, तो वो बाबा बोलते हैं उसके लिए कोई जवाब नहीं, हो गई तो हो गई. तो बाबा ने ये भी बताया है कि इस किताब के अंदर कुछ कुछ ऐसे प्रश्न आपको उठेंगे जिसका कोई जवाब नहीं है. क्यों नहीं है? बिकॉज हम सीमित बुद्धि से असीमित चीज को ग्रहण करने की प्रयत्न करते हैं. वी आर ट्राइंग टू अंडरस्टैंड विथ अवर लिमिटेड माइंड दैट विच इज अनलिमिटेड, और वो नामुमकिन है. इट इज नॉट पॉसिबल. बाबा कहते हैं for the mind to understand that which is beyond mind, mind must go. यानी मनोनाश होना चाहिए, मन का नाश होना चाहिए. मन एक सीमित है, और ये जो ग्रंथ है वो असीमित है, तो वो आप समझ नहीं सकते. तो सर्टन बाबा स्पेसिफिकली सेज कि देयर आर सर्टन एरियाज विच आर अनअंडरस्टैंडेबल. आप अंडरस्टैंड नहीं कर पाएंगे, उसको समझ नहीं. तो ये बाबा ने बताया एक समंदर है, इसको हम ईश्वर के उस ईश्वर से तुलना करते हैं। समंदर में एक लहर आ गई, हुक्की आ गई, अर्ज आ गई, विम आ गई, जिसकी वजह से थोड़ा हलचल हो गया। हलचल होने से एक फर्स्ट इनिशियल संस्कार की उत्पत्ति हुई। फर्स्ट इनिशियल संस्कार। अब बाबा कहते हैं संस्कार को इम्प्रेशन कहते हैं। संस्कार ऐसी चीज है, एक किस्म की एनर्जी है जो ऐसे ही बैठी नहीं रहेगी। इम्प्रेशंस नीड एक्सप्रेशंस। इम्प्रेशन अगर कुछ है, संस्कार है, तो उसको वो एक्सप्रेशन को क्या बोलते हैं? हाँ, क्या बोला सुमन? खरी, अच्छा समझ गए। हाँ, ओके, उनको एक्सप्रेस करना है, और वो एक्सप्रेस करते हैं तो उसको एक अनुभव होता है, एक्सपीरियंस होता है, और वो एक्सपीरियंस लेने के लिए वो संस्कार को या इम्प्रेशन को एप्रोप्रिएट देह या एप्रोप्रिएट बॉडी या एप्रोप्रिएट माध्यम की आवश्यकता होती है। एक इम्प्रेशन है, उसको एक्सप्रेशन करना है, एक्सप्रेशन के माध्यम से उनको एक्सपीरियंस मिलता है, अनुभव मिलता है, लेकिन अनुभव लेने के लिए उनको एप्रोप्रिएट यानी जो स्वाभाविक जो बोल सकते हैं एक देह की ज़रूरत पड़ती है। तो वो स्टार्ट होता है पत्थर से, मेटल से, मिनरल से, ऐसे होते होते अलग अलग एवरी स्टेज में उनका जो एवोल्यूशन है, एवोल्यूशन को क्या बोलते हैं? प्रकटीकरण नहीं, एवोल्यूशन होता है। अरे आप तो मास्टर है, मेरे को हिंदी में बोलने। एनीवे, तो कहने का मतलब ये है पत्थर से, धातु से लेके पान पौधे बोलते हैं, प्लांट बोलते हैं, पेड़ पौधे बोलते हैं, वो अलग अलग एवोल्यूशन होके हम मनुष्य में आ जाते हैं। मनुष्य में आने के बाद ये जो एवोल्यूशन जो बोलते हैं, एवोल्यूशन देयर इज अ वर्ड फॉर एवोल्यूशन। एनीवे, अभी नेक्स्ट टाइम मैं हिंदी की किताब भी लेके आऊँगा। उत्क्रांति समझ में आ गया? हाँ, उत्क्रांति होते होते हम मनुष्य देह लेते हैं। मनुष्य के बाद उत्क्रांति होना बंद, एवोल्यूशन क्लोज। आजकल बहुत सारे वर्कशॉप चलते हैं, सिंपोजियम चलते हैं, सेमिनार चलते हैं, जहाँ कहते हैं कि आपकी उत्क्रांति को हम बढ़ाते हैं। उत्क्रांति बढ़ ही नहीं सकती है। एवोल्यूशन कैन नॉट बी stretched or expanded once the human form is reached. After the human form, मनुष्य शरीर देह लेने के बाद में सिर्फ रीइनकारनेशन, मरण जन्म। और बाबा कहते हैं कि ये जो मरण जन्म है वो कोई सही मरण जन्म नहीं है। इंग्लिश में बाबा कहते हैं नो वन डाइज, कोई मरता नहीं। नो वन नोज टू डाई, किसी को मालूम ही नहीं कैसे मरना। द रेयर वन हु नोज टू डाई इज नेवर बॉर्न अगेन। जो रेयर है आदमी, जिसको मालूम है कि कैसे मरना है, तो वो आदमी का फिर से 2 बार पुनर्जन्म नहीं होता है। यानी जो मरण जो है, तो ये देह का मरण नहीं है, मन का मरण है, सेपरेशन का मरण है, फाइनाइट हुड का मरण है, इल्यूजन का मरण है, भास या भ्रम का मरण है। वो सही मरण है। अगर वो मरण होता है तो हमारा दोबारा हमको जन्म लेने की आवश्यकता है ही नहीं। सो अभी हम जैसे बोले कीड़े मकोड़े तक पहुंच गए हैं। कीड़े मकोड़े अभी ये यहाँ से एक जस्ट इमेजिन, समझो हम पहले चलते थे, अचानक हमको वो क्या बोलते हैं, हैंड ग्लाइडिंग, फ्लाई करने, अरे अचानक हमारा अनुभव क्या होता है। तो वैसे अब तक वॉलंटरी मूवमेंट नहीं था। स्टोन, मेटल, मिनरल ऐसा रिकम्बेंट, प्लांट ऊपर हो गया, अपराइट हो गया, लेकिन अभी तक प्लांट अपने आप से मूव नहीं करता था। अभी ये स्टेज आ गया जो बहुत खुशी का स्टेज है। अब पता नहीं हम लोग ने कैसे सेलिब्रेट किया होगा उस समय जब भी हम वर्म में बन गए, कीड़े मकोड़े में बन गए। हम भाग सकते हैं, यहाँ जाते हैं, वहाँ जाते हैं, उड़ सकते हैं। ये सब ये कीड़ों मकोड़ों की यूनि में आ जाता है। वर्म, जिसको हम बोलते हैं कि वो मोबाइल हो जाते हैं, बोलो मूवमेंट हो जाती है। मालूम पड़ता है कि ये मेरे को मारने को आ रहा है, तो हम भाग सकते हैं, किधर जाके छुप सकते हैं। तो इट्स अ वेरी ग्रेट स्टेप फ्रॉम, और अगेन जब ये वर्म स्टेट में आ रहा है तो रिकम्बेंट पोजीशन वापस ऐसा हो जाता है। सो सौम्या विल रीड, I will try to explain जहाँ तक हो सके हिंदी में, but first I will explain in English, बाद में हिंदी में कोशिश करूँगा. Worm.
Page 19.
Page 19.
Despite all the consciousness so far evolved, the soul is still not conscious of its reality, its original, infinite, eternal state, eternally in the oversoul.
ये जो हम जैसे आरती में कोरस गाते हैं या कव्वाली या भजन में एक कोरस आता है, जिसको हम क्या कोरस ही बोलते हैं, रिफ्रेन बोलते हैं, वैसे ये बाबा की किताब में हमको लगेगा बहुत टाइम रिपीटेशन है. सो एवरी टाइम ही इज रिपीटिंग कि सोल विच इज इन्फिनिटली इटर्नल एंड इन द ओवर सोल, इंस्टेड ऑफ फीलिंग इट्स all power, all knowledge, all bliss, is actually experiencing itself as a worm. समझ गया ना? तो ये अब एक तरह से बाबा का ये जो स्टाइल है वो एकदम अजीब सा स्टाइल है कि जैसे हम बताया कि कव्वाली में कैसे सब गाते हैं, फिर वापस वही आलाप जो बोलते हैं वो चलता है, फिर वापस कुछ गाते, फिर वापस आलाप, वो वैसे बाबा ने बार बार वही. तो पीपल माइट थिंक कि ये तो मुझे मालूम है नहीं, लेकिन अभी फॉर एग्जांपल अभी इंग्लिश आरती हाउ कैन वन फैदम, हम बाद में वो कोरस गाते ही है ना एवरी पैराग्राफ के बाद में. तो ये बाबा यहाँ हमको कोरस सिखाते हैं. वो बताओ वापस कौन सा कोरस है? द सोल.
Although the soul is eternally in the oversoul and is infinite and without form, this partially conscious soul actually experiences itself as a worm in the gross world. This is ignorance. This ignorance persists as long as the consciousness of the soul is not fully evolved, but even when the soul has come to full consciousness, it is still said to be enveloped by ignorance, because this fully evolved consciousness does not make the soul self-conscious instantaneously. On the contrary, when the consciousness of the soul is fully evolved, the soul begins to identify itself as a human being.
बाबा कहते हैं कि ऑल्दो आत्मा इटर्नल है, हमेशा के लिए है, इन्फिनिट है, और ये जो आत्मा है वो परमात्मा के अंदर ही है. ये जो बूंद जो है, ड्रॉप जो है, दैट इज द ड्रॉप इज विद इन द ओवर सोल. द आत्मा इज विद इन द ओवर सोल. फिर भी उनकी जो चेतना है वो ये समझती है, चेतना, द कॉन्शियसनेस ऑफ द सोल थिंक्स दैट आई एम दैट वर्म. इन अदर वर्ड्स, व्हाई बाबा सेज, बिकॉज स्टिल उनकी जो चेतना है, स्टिल द कॉन्शियसनेस एट द वर्म स्टेज इज नॉट कंप्लीट, इट इज इनकम्प्लीट. चेतना कंप्लीट अभी नहीं हुई है. एंड देन बाबा गोज ऑन टू से कि इवन इफ द कॉन्शियसनेस इज कंप्लीट, instead of experiencing the self, which is the God, which is God, which is Paramatma, it continues to experience itself as a human form, because at the entire travail or the sojourn of consciousness, जो right from gaseous state to the human state में, it has started accumulating. वो चिपक गए, वो सब impressions सब चिपक गए. आत्मा परमात्मा ही है और परमात्मा ही रहेगी. आत्मा जैसी कोई चीज़ है ही नहीं, बाबा कहते हैं. खाली परमात्मा ही परमात्मा है. बट आत्मा अपने आप को सेपरेट समझती है. आत्मा थिंक्स दैट आई एम सेपरेटेड फ्रॉम द परमात्मा. एंड इवन इन द फर्स्ट ह्यूमन फॉर्म, व्हेन द कॉन्शियसनेस इज होल एंड कंप्लीट, द आत्मा स्टिल कंटिन्यूज टू आइडेंटिफाई इटसेल्फ एज अ ह्यूमन बीइंग rather than experiencing itself as the Paramatma. And the reason for this is because of the accumulation of impressions or samskaras. आत्मा ह्यूमन फॉर्म यानी मनुष्य देह धारण करने के बाद भी वो नहीं समझती है कि मैं परमात्मा हूँ, क्योंकि द होल क्रिएशन का पॉइंट क्या था कि फ्रॉम अनकॉन्शियसनेस आपको फुल कॉन्शियसनेस होना है. फुल कॉन्शियसनेस कम्स इन द वेरी फर्स्ट ह्यूमन फॉर्म. तो ऑटोमेटिकली मैं परमात्मा हूँ का अनुभव होना चाहिए, पर नहीं होता है, क्योंकि ये अनुभव लेते 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 बहुत सारा गार्बेज, कचरा, संस्कार, इम्प्रेशन वो आत्मा के ऊपर चिपक गया है, कॉन्शियसनेस के ऊपर चिपक गया है. as a result of which it prevents the consciousness of the soul, even at the ripe stage of a first human being, from experiencing itself as the self, and it identifies itself as the human being.
While the consciousness of the
Kala ka.
soul While the consciousness of the soul associates itself with the most first species of worm form, it experiences and exhausts the impression of the most last species of the vegetable form.
एक मिनट अब ये थोड़ा जिस लोग ने पहला those who have attended the first 6 sessions, it is very easy for them to understand this mechanics. इतना अच्छा बाबा बहुत होशियार तो है ही. The mechanics is such, I'll just try to make as easy as possible. Baba uses the most first, the most last, the next, the most next and all that. ये सब terminology बाबा use करते हैं. अभी I'll just first say in English, so then I can. The most first worm form. I repeat, the most first worm form. Before that, where was the consciousness? The consciousness was the most last plant form or vegetable form. Correct? Now, the most last vegetable form is dropped. Now, when the form is dropped, the consciousness cannot focus on the form because there is no form. So the consciousness is now focused on the samskaras or the impressions. It waits for a little while, but it can't, samskaras cannot, वो like a monkey, मेरे को खर्च करने का है, मेरे को अनुभव करने का है, मेरे को body लेने का है, मेरे को ये, all the time it is very restless. So what is the next form? The worm form. So in other words, please try to be with me, the most first worm form is nothing but the consolidated mold of the most last vegetable form dropped. यहाँ तक correct. Most first worm form, ये worm form कैसा form हुआ? वो most last animal, most last vegetable form से वो जो संस्कार बाकी था, तो उससे most first worm form is made. Now I'll just extend before. Now when the most first worm form exhausts and experiences in the most first worm body the samskaras of the most last vegetable form, then the most first worm form is dropped. यहाँ तक समझ में आ गया क्या? So in other words, now for the time being, the most first worm form is dropped. So for the time being, the consciousness, now without a form, is focused on the impressions which were gathered by the most first worm form in that particular body. ये जो अगर ये हम लोग जैसे how in what is it called, algebra, I was very weak in maths. Algebra में कैसा step by step, if you know one step, then it becomes very easy. So now the most first worm form is dropped. The consciousness is now without form. But the samskaras or impressions cannot remain without any form. It is urging, making restless energy, to get another form. So which form it will be? The most next worm form. So the most next worm form is nothing but the consolidated mold of the impressions of the most first worm form dropped. Am I very clear? So in other words, every time a form is dropped, the consciousness is without any form, and the consciousness is focused on the impressions, and it is wanting another form, and it will get more and more and more advanced or complex forms till it comes to the most last worm form. I'm just extending so that the most last worm form is nothing but a consolidated mold of the most last but one worm form, and now the last worm form is dropped. बराबर? When the last worm form is dropped, बैठे रहेंगे because now it has to jump from the worm to the fish. Okay, to the fish. So that is the whole mechanics. अभी मैं हिंदी में आपको समझ में आया क्या? थोड़ा थोड़ा मेरे को भी नहीं आता है समझ में क्या नहीं नहीं वो बाबा क्या कहते हैं एक एग्जाम्पल अब ये मेरा फॉर्म है मेरा शरीर है मेरा शरीर ड्रॉप होता है चेतना तो इंटैक्ट है चेतना कॉन्शियसनेस इज इंटैक्ट बट अभी जब तक मैं शरीर में हूं तब तक मेरा जो कॉन्शियसनेस है आई थिंक दिस इज मी आई व्हेन दिस बॉडी गोज देयर इज नो बॉडी टू से आई सो माय चेतना मेरी चेतना जो है वो मेरे कर्म के ऊपर इंप्रेशंस के ऊपर संस्कार के ऊपर केंद्रित होती है कब तक जब तक कि मुझे दूसरा फॉर्म नहीं मिले और जो दूसरा फॉर्म जो मिला मुझे वो दैट इज द मोल्ड जो मोल्ड को क्या बोलते हैं जैसे हम कुछ बनाते हैं लापी लेके ऐसा बना छाछा 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 ढांचा अभी मेरा दूसरा बॉडी जो होएगा आएगा तो मोस्टली नहीं आएगा बाबा को याद करके पॉप ऑफ कर देंगे मगर लेकिन दूसरा बॉडी जो आएगा वो किसके हिसाब से आएगा जो कर्म मैंने इस युग में किया है इस बॉडी में किया है उसके मुताबिक मेरा नेक्स्ट बॉडी आएगा और वो ऐसा सिलसिला चलते रहेगा जब तक कि सब मेरे संस्कार खत्म नहीं हो जावे सो ये अभी एवरी नाउ एंड देन आई विल नॉट एक्सप्लेन बिकॉज दैट इज द रिदम इट इज जो जिसको बोलते इतना लाइक अ पोइट्री ऐसे ऐसे हुआ तो ऐसे ऐसे हुआ तो ये ह्यूमन बीइंग तक ऐसे ही चलते रहेगा सो आई मे नॉट एक्सप्लेन ऑल द टाइम बिकॉज इट इज द सेम थिंग एम आई क्लियर एज टू हाउ इट गोज अबाउट ओके नाउ यू गो अबाउट
When all the impressions of the most last species of vegetable form are completely exhausted or spent through the diverse experiences had by the soul while identified with the most first species of worm form, then this most first species of worm form is dropped or dissociated and the soul is once again without any form although it is conscious of the impressions of the most first species of worm form.
वेजिटेबल में से वर्म फॉर्म में आ गया द वर्म experiences all the experiences which it was supposed to experience लास्ट जो वेजिटेबल फॉर्म था उसका जो एक्सपीरियंस उसके पास आया इट हैज यूटिलाइज दैट एंड नाउ द मोस्ट फर्स्ट वर्म फॉर्म इज ड्रॉप्ड बट द कॉन्शियसनेस इज देयर कॉन्शियसनेस वंस गेन्ड कैन नॉट बी रिटार्डेड कैन नॉट गो बैक ये बहुत महत्व की चीज़ बाबा ने बताई है मैनी रिलीजियंस बहुत सारे धर्म बोलते हैं कि अगर आपका कर्म खराब होएगा इफ़ यू डू सम बैड डीड्स इन अ ह्यूमन फॉर्म you will become a donkey or a monkey or a horse or whatever it is. So Baba says that it is an impossibility. You cannot go back into other species. Now you are a human. The consciousness is only progressive. You only go forward. The only exception which Baba says is if you misuse your power when you are on the fourth plane of consciousness. We have not come to the involutionary process. And if you misuse your power, अगर आप कोई भी आपकी जो रिद्धि सिद्धि है उसका गैर-उपयोग करते हो उस समय बहुत लंबा है जाने के लिए अभी तो देन यू विल अगेन बिकम स्टोन फिर से यू विल स्टार्ट फ्रॉम द स्टोन फॉर्म अदर देन दैट देयर इज नो वे इन विच यू कैन रिग्रेस कॉन्शियसली
These impressions of the most first species of worm form must be experienced and exhausted. Therefore, the consciousness of the soul associates itself with another appropriate medium and tends the soul to identify with the most next species of worm form.
Most first के बाद now most next species of the worm form. Correct.
This medium of the most next species of worm form is nothing other than the consolidated mold of the impressions of the most first species of the worm form.
कितना पोइट्री के जैसा हो गया हाँ
Species after species of worm form are thus molded and dropped while the consciousness of the soul rapidly evolves through experiencing the varied impressions of worm forms through diverse species of worm forms.
There are so many species. हमको तो मालूम ही नहीं था कितने अभी वो geographic animal planet ये सब देखते. There are millions and millions of birds and animals and worms and all that which we were not even aware of. Now, because of the scientific advancement, we realize that there are so many millions and millions of. We have gone through all those species, and now finally we have become human form.
When the conscious soul is worm conscious and experiences itself as a worm in the gross world, the consciousness of the soul also has, for the first time, the experience of voluntary movement
Voluntary
and
movement.
also experiences that it is an animate creature. This
It is animate. Before that, it was inanimate. Yani, life was there, but it was latent, supta, not manifest. Here, in the very first time, I pay a lot of attention to the worm form. They have, that's why I don't kill worms, because they must be getting through so much of joy, that now they're animate. They experience, I have got life. मैं जिंदा हूँ, मैं भाग सकता हूँ, मैं उड़ सकता हूँ, मैं मजा ले सकता हूँ, कोई मारने को आते है तो मैं किधर कोने में छुप जाता हूँ. You must have experience. You try to kill a mosquito, it will fly away because of the heat of the body. They know. That's why the Chinese people have developed that racket, that.
This worm conscious soul, in its travail to gain more and greater consciousness, also experiences itself in the gross world as an invertebrate and at a later stage in other states of vertebrate, limbless, creeping worm forms of diverse species.
That means first it can be without the vertebra, then vertebrate, and then it has got multiple legs. It has got pairs of legs. It has got only 4 legs. It has got a lot. We have seen so many worms having so many legs, Also the wings, it can fly. All this comes into the worm species.
In other diverse species of worm form, the consciousness of the soul undergoes further varied experiences of voluntary movement through crawling, through pairs of legs, and sometimes through multiple pairs of legs, and sometimes through pairs of legs and pairs of wings. Sometimes the worm conscious soul in varied species of worm form realizes itself as possessing a hairy surface. Sometimes a smooth and silky.
Hairy worms are there, smooth and sleek. It creeps like this. All that snakes and reptiles, they all come in that category.
Silky and sometimes a rough or scaly surface hide. The worm conscious soul also realizes more acutely that it has to struggle for its sustenance and also for its survival, and that it is endowed with sensation and life.
So till the stone metal, there is no food as such. Here they are supposed to struggle for its survival. It requires food. Nobody is going to give a plate to a worm. So they have to struggle and try to find out food. And then the one is that they feel I am alive, I have got life, I am animate, and I can move, and I need food for my maintenance. Sorry? Survival, yes. Survival is different. Yeah, food is okay. Survival also, because you see how the bird will, just come and pick up a worm and all that. So all these things, initially, that is the evolution of consciousness in the worm form. So now this is where life comes into being.
This worm conscious soul, with further evolution of consciousness through greater and varied innumerable experiences of varied and multiple impressions of varied species of worm form, also experiences and realizes that it is an amphibian. That is, it has not only voluntary movement on earth, but also freedom and mobility in water.
So now so much is gained in this worm form. Not only that I've got life, I've got movement, I have to struggle for food, I have to take care of myself. There are hairy bodies, there are smooth bodies, there are two legs, there are four legs, multiple pairs of legs, wings also. And here it's an amphibian, which means it can live on land as well as in water. Sorry?
Reproduction.
Reproduction, yeah, correct.
For our own convenience in understanding the evolution of consciousness more clearly, we include in the worm form and varied species of worms, varied species of insects, varied species of reptiles, and varied species of amphibia.
So yes, all these, ये सब चीजें worm form के अंदर आ जाती है.
In short, we include in the worm form all species that tend to crawl or that crawl in spite of having limbs, legs, and wings, or that are otherwise distinct from birds and quadrupeds. The stone and metal forms had no upright or
Quadrupeds means four-legged. Okay.
the stone and metal forms had no upright or erect stand. They were recumbent forms.
Recumbent, lying down.
Their posture was flat and horizontal. The vegetable form had an upright, erect stand.
झाड़ ऐसे खड़े रहता है, upright, okay.
Now, the worm form is again of the recumbent type of form, which has no upright or erect stand, but is prone to have a prostrate
Worm
posture.
form जो होता है, उनका जो body का position ऐसा होता है, and their face normally looks down. Have you seen a cockroach like this चलते हैं? So that is the characteristic of the worm form.
When the consciousness of the soul associates itself with the most last species of worm form after experiencing all the impressions of the varied species of worm form, and when the conscious soul eventually drops or sheds this most last species of worm form after ages and cycles of multiple diverse experiences in the gross world, the conscious soul again finds itself without any association or identification with forms. But the consciousness of the soul is now centered in the impressions of the most last species of worm form just shed. These impressions must necessarily be exhausted through experience, and to get experience, a suitable medium is necessary.
So Baba कहते हैं, Baba says that after ages and cycles of means it must have taken in terms of time, our time, it must have taken so many thousands and thousands of years for that worm form to remain in the worm form and then to so-called graduate into another form, the fish form.
Therefore, the consciousness of the soul, being centered in the impressions of the most last species of worm form, associates with an appropriate medium and tends the soul to identify itself with the most first species of fish form in order to experience and exhaust the impressions of the most last species of worm form.
I'll just repeat, we have done it, but repetition reinforces remembrance and reproduction. R. When we keep on repeating something, repetition reinforces remembrance. You retain and you reproduce. So Baba is using that technique, in repeating the same thing. The most last species, सबसे अंतिम, of the worm form was nothing but a consolidated mold of the last but one species of the worm form. यहाँ तक it's perfectly okay. And when the most last species of the worm form, after experiencing all the impressions of the most last but, not most, of the last but one species of the worm form, this worm form last drops, sheds, dissociated. Many words are used. It's over. That means it dies. Now the consciousness, the chetna, is focused or centered in the impressions or the samskaras, which this most last species of the worm form had gathered during the time of experiencing the gross world. For the time being, the consciousness is without form. For the time being, the consciousness is focused on the impressions. But the impressions cannot remain as impressions ever. It has to experience the impressions. And in order to gain the experience of that impressions, it has to take the next appropriate form, which is that of the first fish form. Now so in other words, the first fish form is nothing but the consolidated mold of the last worm form dropped. I think it's very clear. Why I am repeating is कि ये अगर ये हमारे दिमाग में घुस जाता है ना तो आगे का थर we can go फटाफट. Go ahead. Sorry.
Kingdom.
Yeah, that will come later on. Seven kingdom. Yeah. We are still on the chapter of what is it called? Initial urge. We are still on the chapter of initial. Kingdom will come. Kingdom will come where again he is repeating the same thing. The ye kingdom mein what is the recumbent hai ya horizontal hai, vertical hai, it's all that. But that will come later. Yeah.
This most first species of first fish form is nothing other than the consolidated mold
I think now
of
we
the
should
impressions of
now
the
what we should do, stop at nothing but and let them all say nothing but the consolidated mold of the last worm form shed. So, anyway, I'm just joking.
consolidated mold of the impressions of the most last species of worm form. As soon as the impressions of the most last species of worm form are exhausted through experiences, the most first species of fish form is dropped or shed because the consciousness of the soul dissociates from this most first species of the conscious soul no longer and the conscious soul no longer identifies itself with that species. Although the conscious soul is now once again temporarily without form, yet the consciousness of the soul is centered in the impressions of the most first species of fish form. In order to experience these impressions of the most first species of fish form, the consciousness of the soul associates itself with a suitable medium and tends the conscious soul, to identify itself as the most next species of fish form. This species is nothing but the consolidated mold of the impressions of the most first species of fish form.
Very simple, I think, the logic. यानी वो वैसे चलते ही रहेगा till you get to the human form. The important thing that Baba says is, I'm repeating, initial urge के अंदर, first sanskar or impression is created. Impression cannot remain just like that. वो ऐसे नहीं रह सकता है. उसको तो हलचल होती है, कुछ न कुछ restlessness है. It requires expression. In order to take the experience, it has to have a form. यानी एक माध्यम या देह या body या medium होना चाहिए. And that is how the whole thing runs. It is automatic. Baba uses at certain places, it is spontaneous and automatic. Even if you don't want a form, you will get a form because impressions cannot remain without experiencing. So ये सिलसिला चलते रहता है.
After ages and cycles, and after innumerable varied impressions of diverse species of fish forms are experienced and exhausted, the consciousness of the soul eventually associates itself with the most last species of fish form in order to experience and exhaust all the impressions of the most last but one species of fish form. Thus, the fish conscious soul, identifying with varied species of fish form, experiences in the gross world that it is a living creature in water, a vertebrate endowed with life, sensation, and voluntary motion, an animate creature with limbs, if any, modified into fins, and that it has to struggle for sustenance and for survival.
मछली के अंदर fins बोलते हैं, जो this is like a, they subsequently then will become wings. You see how gradually architect has drawn out in such a way that now the limbs have become the fins and then fins will become the wings, and that way it progresses. So ये सब चीज़ें है. First of all, it is vertebrate, यानी कि उसमें वो vertebrae आता है. जिस लोग ने मच्छी खाया है वो मालूम पड़ेगा, उसमें vertebrae आते हैं अंदर में. और it's a living creature, it is living life है उसके अंदर, बराबर. A vertebrate endowed with life and sensation. उनको sensation है, गर्म है, ठंडा है, पकड़ने को जाते हैं तो भाग जाती है. The moment you try to catch a fish, it will run away. So all that voluntary motion, an animate creature with limbs, if any, modified into fins, and that it has to struggle for sustenance and for survival. It has to struggle.
The fish conscious soul does not experience an upright, erect stand, but it experiences itself as a recumbent that can never hold its head high and erect and assert an upright stand in the gross world. The fish conscious soul eventually sheds or drops its identity with the most last species of fish form as soon as the consciousness of the soul has experienced and exhausted all the impressions of the most last but one species of fish form. Thus, the conscious soul once again finds itself without identification with any form. But the consciousness of the soul is conscious of impressions of the most last species of fish form.
Sorry. From all this we get a certain mechanics in a sense. Whatever the form is, we are actually experiencing the samskaras or the impressions that we had gathered in our last form. And when all those samskaras or impressions are experienced and exhausted, this form drops. So if somebody were to ask me whether, supposing somebody asked me, whether my purpose in life is fulfilled or not, my purpose, I would say no. Because if it was fulfilled, I would not be here to say yes or no. I would have died. You see, that means my samskaras of my past form, whatever it may be, he, she, Easterner, Westerner, happy, luck, whatever, are still there. And I am experiencing that. And as I am experiencing that, they are being exhausted or utilized or experienced, correct? And the moment all those samskaras that I have brought with this body are exhausted and experienced, toing, over. Matter over. Irrespective of what the cause may be. ये देह में मैं कब तक जीऊँगा जब तक मेरे impressions या संस्कार जो लास्ट देह में मैंने गैदर किया था वो लेके मैं इधर आया हूँ और वो मैं अनुभव ले रहा हूँ, एक्सपीरियंस कर रहा हूँ. जब वो सब खत्म हो जाएंगे तो पड़क करके मेरा मुंडी नीचे चला जाएगा. ओके, सो but now in this life I am also accumulating fresh samskaras. You see, now when I drop this body, I again repeat, if I don't remember to take God's name, because Baba has said with authenticity, whosoever takes my name at the time of breathing his last comes to me. Comes to me meaning वो बाबा के पास जाएंगे यानी कि उनका पुनर्जन्म नहीं रहेगा. No rebirth for such a soul who remembers Baba at the time of breathing last. मरने का हमारे मजाक में वो मरने का मतलब क्या हो गया कि श्वास बाहर निकाला और अंदर लेने को भूल गया तो उसका मतलब मर गया आदमी. बाहर तो निकल गया. That means what? Your breath has gone out but you forget to take it in. Obviously you don't take it, so you are dead. But when will that point come when all the impressions of my past birth which I have brought What do I bring? I only bring all those impressions, are exhausted and experienced. अब ये जो impressions है, if I don't, supposing, I hope not, but if I don't take Baba's name, then ये जो impressions, whatever these impressions which I have gathered in this life, they will form another body. And till that time, my consciousness will be focused on the impressions. And if my impressions are so-called good, जिसको हम predominantly pure good बोलते हैं, I will experience a state of heaven. Heaven को क्या बोलते हैं? स्वर्ग. स्वर्ग का अनुभूति मुझे होगी, स्वर्ग का अनुभव कर, वो कुछ जगह नहीं है, वो मन की भावना है. और जो जीपीएस में आप लगाएंगे स्वर्ग तो कुछ मिलेगा नहीं आपको. वो इट इज जस्ट अ स्टेट ऑफ माइंड. सो जब मैं स्वर्ग में जाऊंगा, मैं जाना नहीं चाहता हूँ, बट सपोजिंग गया, बिकॉज बाबा के पास जाने का फिर स्वर्ग का क्या मतलब है? व्हाट इज द इम्पोर्टेंस ऑफ हेवन व्हेन वी आर थिंकिंग ऑफ गोइंग टू बाबा? तो एज आई एम यूटिलाइजिंग दो संस्कारास, उसका मैं अनुभूति अनुभव ले रहा हूँ स्वर्ग में, तो वो धीरे 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 कम होते रहता है. और जब नियर बैलेंस, व्हेन इट कम्स टू नियर बैलेंस, पप कि कहीं से मैं वापस दूसरा जन्म ले लेता हूँ. आई विल कम बैक अगेन इन अ न्यू फॉर्म. सो दैट mechanics keep on happening. And Baba says, you know, that I remember somewhere, read somewhere, you know, in Gujarati saying, मने तो आऊँ पर तमे क्या आव्या करो छो? मुझे तो आना पड़ता है. I have to come because it is my duty and responsibility to come age after age. But why do you keep coming? Why can't you just pop off and not come? And how to pop off and not come? Baba has given a simple solution. In my wish, if you read Baba's My Wish, the sixth point is, I say with my divine authority to each and all, that whosoever takes my name at the time of breathing his last comes to me. So do not forget to remember me in your last moments. Even if you start remembering me, even if you remember me just once every day, you will not forget to remember me in your dying moments. The Baba asks us to practice it, you know. So आज से practice करना है, we should start practicing Baba's name so that any moment when the death comes and Baba आ गया, तो you get moksha, mukti, liberation, salvation, no further birth and death, no further body at all. That is Baba's promise. So that's a shortcut if you don't like to come. But if you want to come and enjoy life and go for parties and picnics and dance and all that, then remember not to take his name when you breathe your last. So then you will keep coming as many. All right.
These impressions of the most last species of fish form must be experienced and exhausted, and therefore the consciousness of the soul now associates with another suitable medium and thus tends the soul to identify itself with the most first species of bird form.
So now again,
Which-
now the fish has become the bird. So those with the fish in the water, now gradually it is coming towards the land. In the air, rather.
Of the bird form, which is but the consolidated mold of the impressions of the most last species of fish form. In the most first species of bird form, the consciousness of the soul experiences and exhausts the impressions of the most last species of fish
ये
form.
तो same repetitive है, so no need to explain.
When all the impressions are thus exhausted, the consciousness of the soul dissociates itself from the most first species of bird form, and the conscious soul drops or sheds its identity with the most first species of bird form. That is, the most first species of bird form is
Is dropped.
dropped.
Clear.
The conscious soul is once again without form, but it has consciousness centered in the impressions of the most first species of the bird form just dropped. These impressions must be experienced and exhausted, and therefore the consciousness of the soul automatically associates itself with the most next species of bird form and tends the conscious soul to identify itself with the most next species of bird form, which species is but the consolidated mold of the impressions of the most first species of bird
No
form.
explanation required. The important thing here, Baba is using this word tend. It tends the consciousness of the soul to associate with another form. And every time this form is taken, it is more and more and more advanced form. In every species, it starts with the crudest and ends with the most sublime, most supreme. Everywhere, it is like that. And the Baba uses the word tends, which means there is a spontaneous, automatic, you can say tendency. There is a tendency to associate with that form. It is not that, oh, I want to do it, do I do this or do I do that? No, automatically the soul tends to get another form which is based on the past samskaras. So depending upon the samskaras, which it requires to be exhausted, it takes a form. I'll give you an example. I'm digressing, which is my common habit. Many people ask, कि भाई, I am born in this particular, what is it called? Zodiac sign. ये नक्षत्र में मेरा जन्म हुआ है, इसलिए मैं बहुत सफ़र कर रहा हूँ. Because I am born in that particular zodiac sign, that is why I am suffering too much. If my mother had held on to me before pushing me out another half an hour, that zodiac sign would have changed and I would have been very happy person. So that is the thought process, कि मेरा मम्मी ने अगर मेरे को पकड़ के रखा था आधा घंटा और तो मेरा नक्षत्र चेंज हो जाता था और मेरा नसीब पूरा चेंज हो जाता था. So it is not that you are going through whatever you are going through, suffering or joy, because of the zodiac sign, but according to the sanskaric mathematics, संस्कार के मैथमेटिक्स या मैथ के हिसाब से you yourself as a soul, आत्मा के हिसाब से chose to be born in that particular nakshatra या zodiac because you knew innately यानी ऐसा जानबूझ के नहीं, automatically you knew कि अगर मैं इस zodiac में born करूँगा, if I am born in that zodiac, I will get the optimum opportunity to utilize my past samskaras. Am I making sense? So it is not that we are suffering or enjoying because many people say, oh, he is born with a silver spoon. Some people born with golden spoon. Some people born with plastic spoon. Some people born with no spoon. It is nothing of that sort, that, oh, he is such a lucky man. There is no luck, unluck. It is all according to our past samskaras or impressions. So basically what we are today, what I am today, is nothing but a consolidated mold of my last whatever that may be, body, form. So that is how it goes. Everything is in perfect order. Everything is perfectly functioning. Perfect. हमको लगेगा ये सब खून खराबी ये सब हो रहा है. Yes, apparently it seems that things are not going well, apparently. But that is the scheme of things, that is the scheme of whole thing. When Baba says that he had meetings with the past perfect masters, Baba said this twice, once in Meherabad he said this, once when he had gone to Assisi, he said he was in the cave of Saint Francis Xavier's and Assisi, no?
Not Saint Francis.
Okay, Assisi. That he had chalked out a plan for some 2000 years. So when he being the captain of the creation and when he has chalked out a plan, what can go wrong? How can it go wrong? He has chalked out. It is all under his watch, you may say. When you go on a ship, there's a captain, there's a skipper, and under his watch everything is happening. Things may not, the ship may roll, ye hota hai, wo hota hai. Sometimes it may capsize also. But then he is aware of what is happening. Nothing, according to me, my impression is, nothing is out of control. It cannot be out of control. It is perfectly in control of the avatar and the 5 perfect masters who are today. We don't know who they are. because the avatar is the eternal living perfect master. I am digressing, but just, yeah. Eternal living perfect master, whether he is in the physical form or not, his nazar is always on his creation at all time. He cannot afford to ignore or neglect anything. Apparently, it may appear that there's a war going on, there is this terrorism and rapism and stuff like that, but they are all a part of the evolution of consciousness. We go through all these things in order to experience all these things and then move on. This is my impression.
On and on, ages after ages, and cycles after cycles, this chain of successive associations and dissociations with varied species of a particular form moves onwards steadily and progressively and gives out innumerable different impressions to be experienced by the conscious soul. Directly and indirectly, these associations and dissociations of the consciousness of the soul are absolutely essential to keep the wheel of evolution of consciousness revolving. The evolution of gross forms is but a byproduct in the universal factory of evolution of consciousness.
Right. Now, somebody had asked Baba, there are so many species which are now extinct. There are no dinosaurs, and there may be millions of such species which are extinct. We are only talking about dinosaurs because that has been blown up. But there are so many species in terms of birds, in terms of worms, in terms of whatever, you know. So Baba said that that wheel of evolution of consciousness is so made that even if hundreds and hundreds of species are extinct, it will be able to get those experiences through hybrid species or through some other way the experience will be had. In other words, just because certain species or hundreds of species are extinct does not mean that the evolution of consciousness will stop. It means that. Okay?
The bird conscious soul identifies with one species, then with the next, and then the next species of bird form, one after the other, in regular succession until all the species of bird form are associated and dissociated alternately by the consciousness of the soul while experiencing multifarious impressions in the gross world, and thus the evolved consciousness of the conscious soul tends the soul to realize itself as bird in every species of the bird form. Though the soul is eternally without form,
See, now Baba is repeating, though the soul is eternally without form,
and in the oversoul, yet the bird conscious soul consistently realizes that it is no other than a bird in the gross world, experiencing bird impressions on earth, on water, and in air. It realizes itself as a feathered vertebrate capable of flying in air, and with the help of two legs, it maintains an erect stand.
यानी पक्षी बाबा कहते हैं कि आत्मा जो असीमित है, जो इटर्नल है, यानी हमेशा के लिए है, वो आत्मा आज अज्ञानता के कारण अनुभव करते हैं कि मैं एक पक्षी हूँ. In short, so everything is based on ignorance. Today, I am experiencing that I am a physical, gross, physical, human, male form. It is bas, it is illusion. It's an illusion. But now, how to get, because this illusion has been going on for millions and millions and millions of years, how to get rid of that illusion? Basically, वो discourses में बताया है कैसे, but we won't go into all that. Basically, what we are expected to do is to do whatever needs to be done to perform our duties and responsibilities. हमारा जो कर्तव्य है, हमारी जो जिम्मेदारी है, वो निभाना है. लेकिन साथ साथ मैं नहीं ये कर रहा हूँ. I am not the doer. I am not doing it. It is Baba who is doing through me. अगर ये एक मेंटल मेकअप हमारे मन में हो जाए कि I discharge and fulfill all my duties and responsibilities required in life, but at the same time have a strong feeling that it is not I who is doing all these things, it is Baba who is doing through me, then by and large, our association with the gross is gradually diminished. That aham, I am the doer, gets diminished. So that is one very, I think, जिसको हम लोग आजकल की भाषा में हैक बोलते हैं, हैक. So this is one good hack in order to be, what should I say, detached with whatever is happening, in order to not being affected by whatever is happening out there. जो होना है वो तो होते रहेगा, but the problem is not होना है, the problem is we get affected. हमें उसका effect होता है. So Baba says that when you have used this hack, as they say, that whatever I have to do, just keep doing it. जैसे उपासनी महाराज would say, दो ही चीज करना है लाइफ के अंदर. एक तो आपका कर्तव्य करो, आपको जो निभाना है, जो कर्तव्य करना है, आपका जो जिम्मेदारी है वो निभाओ, और बाकी के समय में प्रभु का नाम लो, ईश्वर का नाम लो, और कुछ करना ही नहीं है आपको. So what Upasni Maharaj would say, is that there are two things you are supposed to do in life. One is perform your duties and responsibilities. Once that is done, the rest of the time think of God. That's all. Nothing else to be done. देखा जाए तो कितना सरल है, but अनुभव में रखने को, to put it into practice is a difficult thing. Yeah.
Eventually, after ages and cycles of experiences of varied species of bird form, the bird conscious soul sheds or drops the most last species of bird form as soon as the consciousness of the soul dissociates itself from the most last species of bird form, and the consciousness of the soul dissociates itself from the most last species of bird form as soon as the consciousness experiences and fully exhausts all the impressions of the most last but one species of the bird form in the most last species of bird form.
Simple.
Again, the conscious soul experiences itself as being without any form for the time being, although the consciousness, evolved further and greater, is always there. Once consciousness is achieved by the soul, this consciousness goes on evolving more and more and can never be lost or devolved.
Very important. Once your consciousness is evolved, you can't go back. That means an animal cannot become a bird cannot become a fish. एक टाइम जानवर बोलते, क्या बोलते, जानवर की यूनि में आ गए तो वो फिर से पक्षी नहीं बन सकता है, या पक्षी है तो वो मछली नहीं बन सकता है. Consciousness only goes and moves further, on and on.
The consciousness of the soul without form now gets centralized in the impressions of the most last species of bird form just dropped. These impressions must necessarily be spent or exhausted by the consciousness of the soul. Therefore, consciousness associates itself with the suitable medium and thus ends the conscious soul. Tends the conscious
Thus
soul.
tends the tending जो बोलते, tendency, tending, automatic, involuntary. I wanted this word but it did not come. Involuntary. You don't do it consciously. It involuntary, automatic हो जाता है. Involuntarily, the consciousness tends to take the next appropriate form. What is appropriate? What is appropriate is based on the samskaric mold of the last form. So automatically it tends, I have to now take this form, I have to now take that form.
And thus tends the conscious soul to identify itself with the most first species of animal form. Through this most first species of animal form, the consciousness of the soul experiences the impressions of the most last species of bird form that was dropped or from which it was dissociated. This most first species of animal form is nothing other than the consolidated mold of the impressions of the most last species of bird form shed. After innumerable and diverse experiences of the impressions of the most last species of bird form through the form of the most first species of animal form, the consciousness of the soul completely exhausts the impressions of the most last species of bird form and then automatically dissociates itself from identification with the most first species of animal form. In this manner, the form of that species is shed by the conscious soul, or the form of that species is said to have dropped or died.
Understood? Anybody not understanding anything so far? Everybody is very, because it is so repetitive that it is, it sinks in our.
Again, the conscious soul, with greater evolved consciousness, finds itself without a form, although the consciousness of the soul is centered in the impressions of the form just discarded or dropped of the most first species of animal form. These impressions of the form just dropped of the most first species of animal form must be experienced or exhausted by the consciousness of the soul, so that the conscious soul should not be aware of any impressions of any form, but be conscious only of the reality of its own infinite, eternal state without forms or impressions, and through knowledge experience the Oversoul. Throughout the travail of the soul to gain that consciousness for itself which would make it realize the reality of its self, the conscious soul goes on and on in an apparently unending chain with its consciousness endeavoring ceaselessly to experience and exhaust all impressions that centralize the consciousness of the soul, deviating this consciousness from the reality of the eternal and infinite state of the self eternally in the oversoul to the consciousness of duality of illusion of the gross world. Thus, the consciousness of the soul, in an effort to gain consciousness of the reality of the self, is consistently shrouded in an envelope of ignorance.
So, what Baba is trying to convey is the soul, Atma, the drop, is always the Paramatma, is always the ocean, but because of the ignorance, the illusion, the bhas of the bubble, it is experiencing itself as other than or separated from the ocean. In the earlier chapters, what we had done or studied was, I always was, am, and ever will remain God. Because God is infinite. If God is infinite, there is nothing outside God. हम सब God में ही हैं. God is eternal. That means I always was, am, and will ever remain. Why don't I experience that? Why don't मुझे ये अनुभूति क्यों नहीं होती है वो उसकी कि मैं ईश्वर हूँ मैं God हूँ करके? Is because at the time, initial time only, initially, when the first samskaras or impression emerged automatically, अनायास बोल सकते हैं, अनायास, without any reason, कोई cause नहीं, cause was only who am I, that's all. You know, instead of realizing the self, see, in order for me to know that I am God, I have to experience everything connected with I am not God. That process is known as neti. I am not this, I am not that. So the basic structure of this creation is that you know yourself, by going through the experience of not knowing yourself. The very dedication of this book, dedicate किया गया है इस book को, dedicated to the universe, the illusion that sustains the reality. एक reality है और एक illusion है. जैसे कि मैं supposing if I am the reality and there is a sun or a light and there is a shadow. The shadow is an illusion. I am the reality. But because there is a shadow, I know that I exist. I don't know whether I am making sense. So in other words, I had given this example earlier. Knowing the false as false is knowing the truth. Knowing the false as false is knowing the truth. The another one was, when real light appears, this darkness which you think is light disappears. When real light appears, this darkness which you think is light disappears. In other words, when real awakening happens, ये तो मैंने बनाया है, बाबा का शब्द नहीं है ये. When real awakening happens, this sleeping, I am sleeping now actually. From reality point of view, I am asleep.
False awake.
The false awake state disappears. In other words, when reality appears, this illusion, which I think is the reality, disappears. Another example. A dream becomes a dream only when you wake up. स्वप्न कब स्वप्न बनता है? जब हम जागृत होते हैं तब. जब हम स्वप्न का अनुभव करते हैं तब हम सोचते हैं कि ये ट्रूथ है, ये रियलिटी है, स्वप्न नहीं है. लेकिन जब हम जागृत होते हैं तब अरे ये तो स्वप्न था. सो ड्रीम इज नेवर अ ड्रीम as long as we are dreaming. It's only when we wake up we realize, oh, this was all a dream. So Baba, who is in the real awakened state, tells us, you are not awake. I think I am awake. I am talking, you are listening. Baba says, you are not awake. You are asleep. You don't have knowledge. You are in ignorance, But when will I realize that experientially? Only when I too am awakened to his state of awakenedness. So in other words, God talks about what we are not. I am not gas, I am not metal, minerals, stone, I am not vegetables, I am not fish, I am not bird, I am not animal, I am not worm in between, worm bull gaya, and I am not a human being. I am God. But how do I know that I am God? Unless I experience all that I am not. And I discard it. Just as how evolution is discarding. One after the other, it is discarding. I am not this, I am not that. In Aarti we pray this, Neti, Neti, Veda Pukare. I am not this, I am not that. I might tend to be repetitive, but it's good to be repetitive, Where Baba had given a prayer to the Mandali to recite, I am not the body, I am not the mind, I am not this, I am not that. I am nothing but a living lie of that truth. That is me. And unless the lie is dead, the truth cannot be. The false self has to die in order to experience the real self. Another one, where you are, God is not. Where God is, you are not. I remember in our Bombay center we had that big, and some intellectual chap came, what is it writing, where you are, God is not, where God is not. Then we had to explain what Baba is trying to say, that as long as the mind is there, as long as the ego is there, the false ego is there, as long as I think that I am this body or I am the mind, then you will not get the experience of Godhood. And when you get the experience of Godhood, all this illusion, never there, as if nothing is happening. When you wake up from dream, what? Do you give any importance to the dream? No. Oh, it was just a dream. So all these billions of years in our calculation, is nothing but 1 second, not even a second, because nothing has ever happened, nothing is ever happening at all that way. Baba says that. But we don't experience that. So here Baba says that the soul which is eternally in the oversoul, which is actually having infinite knowledge, infinite power, infinite bliss, infinite everything, eternal and infinite, indivisible, unfortunately, through the introduction of ignorance or illusion, experiences itself as the animal, or as the bird, or as the fish, or as the human being. Go ahead.
Therefore, in order that the consciousness of the soul should experience and thus exhaust the impressions of the most first species of animal form, the consciousness of the soul now associates automatically with an appropriate medium which will permit and aid it to experience the impressions of the most first species of the animal form.
Mark the word automatically. It automatically happens. Without any conscious effort, automatically tends to associate with a more advanced form.
This association of the consciousness of the soul perforce tends the conscious soul to identify itself with the most next species of animal form. This most next species of animal form is no other than the consolidated mold of the impressions of the most first species of animal form. As soon as the impressions are experienced and exhausted through the most next species of animal form, this species is dropped by the conscious soul. The soul once again experiences that it is not identified with any gross form of the gross world. When the animal conscious soul is without any form, the consciousness of the soul is centered in the impressions of the most next species of animal form just dropped or shed. These impressions must also be experienced in order that they may be exhausted, and therefore the consciousness of the soul automatically associates itself with another medium, and this perforce tends the conscious soul to identify itself with the most next to the next species of the animal form. After ages and cycles of varied and innumerable associations with and dissociations from diverse species of animal form, the consciousness of the soul eventually associates itself with that medium which tends the conscious soul to identify itself as being the most last of the last species of animal form.
So Baba is just emphasizing through these words, the most last of the last, the most first, the most next, just to give us an idea of how the evolution takes place. And I had said this in one of the earlier sessions, I was telling you about the dedication where Baba is dedicating this book to the universe. And what is the universe? What is universe? According to one of Baba's statements, it is a divine incubator. It's a spiritual incubator in which the consciousness of the soul incubates and becomes perfect. We all know what an incubator is. In our school time, we used to, steal an egg from the hen and keep it in an incubator with proper light, proper heat, proper humidity, with cotton placed on the bed, and after a few days from the egg, the chick would come out and we'll feel so happy about it. Wow, that way. So the entire creation or universe is nothing but a divine or a spiritual, divine you can say, incubator, in which the consciousness of the soul incubates and becomes perfect. So that is how it is. Go ahead.
All throughout the experience of the animal conscious soul, the soul identified itself through its consciousness with varied species of animals in the gross world, in water, on earth, and below the surface of the earth, and realized the experience of an animate creature, usually as a quadrupedal organized being endowed with life, sensation, and voluntary motion, and which all the while had to struggle for sustenance and survival, sometimes as an herbivorous creature and sometimes as a carnivorous creature.
Carnivorous creature, animal eating another animal. Herbivorous means a vegetarian animal, like a hippopotamus or elephant, and they're all horse, donkey. They don't eat meat. There are certain carnivorous animals, lions, tigers, and they eat meat. Jackals, hyena, they eat meat.
The animal form has no erect or upright posture and has a tendency to look down with drooping head. Apes, however, are the most evolved type of of
Of
animals,
animals.
and they tend to stand erect like human beings.
So ape or animals are towards the fag end of the animal species before they become human beings.
Ultimately, after ages and cycles, when all the impressions of the most last but one species of animal form are experienced and exhausted through the medium of the most last species of animal form, the consciousness of the soul dissociates itself from the most last species of animal form, and the conscious soul no longer identifies itself with this most last species of animal form. This form is dissociated by the consciousness of the soul and is dropped or shed. However, through the most last species of animal form, though the sorry, Mere Baba, though the most last species of animal form is dropped or shed, the impressions of the most last species of animal form are left or retained, and the consciousness of the soul is centralized or focused on the impressions of the most last species of animal form. The conscious soul is once again without form. These impressions must necessarily be experienced and exhausted, and hence the consciousness of the soul now associates itself with another suitable medium, and the soul perforce tends to identify itself through its own consciousness with the most first human form. This human form is no other than the consolidated mold or cast of the impressions of the most last species of animal form.
So now we have become human beings. We have only 2 minutes left. So we stop in this 1.5 hours. We have made remarkable progress from being worms to, to becoming fish, and then, animals, birds, animals, and now human form. That's a great achievement. 1.5 hours we could make so much of progress. So we keep this for the next session. I'm not sure when the next session would be, because I'm told by Johan that they are going to wrap up the entire arrangement for Amar Tithi. Perhaps then they will be busy for Baba's birthday celebration. Sorry? Okay. Soumya is correcting me and prompting me to say that Johan confirmed that we'll have some meetings in Feb. So I'm very open to it whenever they are available. We'll continue with this. And as I said at the beginning, the idea is to read God speaks. That's what Baba wanted. He never said try to understand and all that. Understanding, if at all we can get something inside our brains, then I consider it as a bonus. So it's a bonus that we are able to understand something, otherwise because Baba said that he would wish that all of us read God speaks at least once. So our attempt is to read God. Any questions with anybody? All right, we have some God speaks for sale. It is being sold at rupees 500 each, which I think is fairly reasonable. So if anybody wants to buy, they can buy and give the payment to Rakesh Acharya, who is doing this social work without any commission. He must have invested some money and kept it without any interest, isn't it? Loss of interest. So anybody wants to buy, they feel welcome to buy. And if anybody has any questions to ask, again, welcome to ask. Otherwise, we close. Neha Sharat says that we should set the dates in advance so that people can plan accordingly. That's what she says, but it's not in my hand. I am equally in the dark as you are. But somebody has to be there. We have volunteers. There were 3 volunteers here who are spending their time to see that number one, we get a space, number two, that we go live, and number three, that it is recorded so that it can be kept on the trust's website. So if these arrangements can be made elsewhere, I don't mind reading it anywhere, if that can be done. I don't mind reading it at our own home for that matter, you know. But that, it is all, yeah, I agree with you. What you are saying is, I agree. You had told me earlier also, but unfortunately it is not in my hand. And I am very, what should I say, diplomatic? I am very much clear about what is in my kshetra. Okay, I am responsible for that. Beyond that, I don't take any responsibility because I don't have the wherewithal to do this recording and all that. So, but yes, you can take this query up to the authorities. No, these are the like permanent members. They are permanent members for volunteering to do all this. Anyway, we'll keep this in mind. We'll put it on to the trustees and see whether they can find more volunteers and maybe another space for us to.
Ah, you can see it on.
Yeah. No. What she's saying is, you can see the recording only if it is recorded. Ha. Okay. Yeah, correct. But some people find it more energetic and fun to be physically present here. So we can't help it, yeah. Okay, thank you, Baba, and thanks to all of you. Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai. Jai Baba. Thank you. And thank you, all the three of you. Naman, thank you. Rakesh, thank you. Rochit, thank you. Somya, thank you.
Baba, thank
Thank
you.
you, sir.
Baba, thank you.
I was wanting somebody to say thank you.
Baba, thank you.
Baba, thank you first. I said that first. Baba is always first. Jai Baba. Jai Baba. Jai Baba.